Great. So I'm going to welcome everyone to the networking studio, to another session that we have of Experts Connect, and we're the Power Q&A. I'm going to introduce Rhonda Douglas. Rhonda is an award-winning Canadian poet. She's a fiction writer and a writing mentor. She's the author of Welcome to the Circus, How to Love a Lonely Man, and Some Days I Think I Know Things, the Cassandra Poems. Her writing has been published across Canada. She's won awards from the Malahat Review, Art Poetry Magazine, Prairie Fire, and Room Magazine, among others. Rhonda received her MFA in Creative Writing in 2012 from the University of British Columbia. She's also an alumna of the Humber School for Writers and the Banff Centre Writing Studio. Originally from Grand Bank, Newfoundland, Rhonda now lives in Ottawa, Ontario. Publishers Weekly said her short fiction collection, Welcome to the Circus, bubbles with originality and daring and is an exhilarating read. She's the founder of First Book Finish and the Writers Flow Studio and the host of the top-rated podcast, The Resilient Writers Radio Show. So welcome, Rhonda. So good to have you here.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for scheduling this. I really appreciate it. So we're going to talk podcasting today, right?
We're going to talk podcasting today, and I have listened. I was on your podcast a few months ago or a few weeks ago, and one of the things that surprised me when you invited me was how dynamic and how easy it was to talk to you, to be on the show, to get the message out, to really share what my experience was. And it dawned on me how much you have this honed in, that you know what you're doing, and then that you're also a writer and an editor, and it seems like you're juggling a lot of hats. And I was just surprised. How does she keep it together? How does she do this? So I guess, when this group at the networking studio, we're mostly freelance editors that edit in all these different genres. And what I notice that happens in freelance editing is when you're starting off, you seem to be so focused on that the only thing I can ever do is edit on a manuscript. And we don't think of all the other opportunities that are out there that we could also be doing that might also provide an additional source of knowledge or of income or to build community. So that's what excited me about having you here. And we do have kind of a list of questions, but I guess what I want to start off with was, when did you decide you wanted to have a podcast, and how did you get started?
So I came to this as a nurture strategy. So I'm assuming in my business, I have to attract people, right? I have to be visible and attract people. When people find me, then I want to nurture those relationships. And then eventually I want to convert them into one of my programs. So this was a nurture strategy. And I had been thinking of it for a while before I did it, if I'm honest with you. And I was just worried. I'm not a very techie person. And so I was just worried about the tech that was involved. Like, did I have to I sometimes saw guys podcasting and they had mixers and things. And I was like, I can't with that. So it took a while. So finally, I started doing the planning at the end of 2022. And then I started the podcast. We launched in March of 2023. So it's really just been a year and a half. And so and the purpose was to nurture. So one of the things that's really important to me in my business is building an email list. So I know everybody's all about the social media, but all the statistics show that people don't buy off of social, they buy more through email. So I wanted to have a sense of community. I wanted it not to feel like I was talking to people I didn't know, you know what I mean? And so, and then I have all these friends who are writers who are always looking for ways to promote their books. So I didn't think I would ever run out of people to interview. And that's definitely true. So, and I love talking about writing with writers. I could do it all day and all night. So, and then the other thing is I didn't want to have to get all dressed up and wear mascara and, all the things every single time. I wanted to do something. So that led me to audio over video. It is possible to also do a video podcast and put it on YouTube, yada, yada, yada. But I just wanted the audio. I find audio to be a really intimate medium. You've got somebody's voice in your ear. I was always listening to podcasts. And so it made sense to me to have that be a thing. Sort of was, I had no, when I started my business, I had no online business experience. And so I was learning from a woman named Amy Porterfield, who you've probably heard of. And when it comes to building an email list and building up a business, she talks about having weekly content, consistent weekly content that you share that is valuable for your audience. And so when I started thinking about it, I had started out blogging and that worked. But then I switched to podcasting. And it was to have that weekly, consistent, valuable content that I could then email my list and say, hey, I did this for you this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And your emails are fantastic. I'm on that list. If you're not on the list, I just posted Rhonda's website in the chat, and we'll have it also in the notes of the meeting that we share with everyone. So I think some of the parallels with podcasting, and this is not one of the questions that I told you I'd ask you, but I'll ask and see, because I think it's an easy one to answer. It's about content planning too. Like, who do I want to have? What do we want to talk about? How far advanced do you plan that out?
So right now it's planned out pretty far. Like I just finished this week we'll post, I do 12 episodes a season. So we'll post episode number 12 and then I'll wrap it up next week. And then we'll take a little break and I'll do season 6. And I've already got they're all in the can for season 6. And I'll probably run into season 7 by the time I schedule some of the folks that are, that either have pitched me or that I want to talk to. But I wasn't always that scheduled out. When I started, my goal was to have 4 planned so that I knew what was coming and I could, I could just kind of plan it out and know what I was going to be talking to people about next. And so I just wanted to kind of be a month ahead because I do it weekly. So I just thought, okay, if I know the next month, I'm solid. Like if I've got 4, I'm good. And if I can get those 4 done, that gives me a month to then do the next 4 and the next 4. And that worked for a really long time. And then what happened was, well, as you know, Linda, because you're in this group, I started this peer mastermind where like writers who are serving other writers online just get together. And I sent out an email to everybody in that group saying, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? Because they all were writers or editors. And pretty much all of them were like, yes. And those that also had a podcast offered me to have me on theirs. And so I ended up with like 30 different people scheduled all at once. And I kind of went, stop. Like it was a lot.
That's so wonderful. Yeah. That's so wonderful.
And so that's how I've gotten this far ahead, but I don't aim to be this far ahead. I aim to be like 4 ahead.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. And having been in that group that you host, I've been in writers groups, but this is a whole other level of experience where every time I just sit and listen to everybody because there's like so much information being shared and really good in-depth information about the industry, about projects, side projects, courses with data. I'm really blown away by the hard data that you guys share sometimes, which is excellent. So do you usually batch record these? Do you find that's easier, or do you just schedule them when you know that you're going to be available to host them?
I mostly schedule them when I'm available. So I use Calendly and I have it synced with my schedule. So generally that works. Every now and again, I have a little hiccup, but generally that works. And I have a workflow in Calendly that then as soon as they book, it sends them the Zoom link. And also follows up, 24 hours before and blah, blah, blah. So that works really well and doesn't seem to take much of my time. So I have had in the past, like things where somebody has said, yes, they'd like to be on the show. And then you have to follow them up. And I do very little of that anymore. Like if I sent you the link to book and you didn't book, I kind of, move on to the next person.
Yeah.
So I don't do the kind of like chasing people down thing.
Great.
And I do them as I'm available. I did for a while try batching, like, okay, I'm going to do them all on Saturdays and, but I just find it works better to kind of do 1 or 2 a week, 1 or 2 a week, 1 or 2 a week. Seems to work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would break up the day, I think, in the work routine as well, to have that other kind of distraction or project to work on. So, one of the things that you mentioned to me that I loved was that when we were recording was that you keep these short and you keep them short for a reason. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about how you chose the time length? How did you start off with that time length? How, you changed it and why?
I no, I didn't start off. I started off just like talking to whomever I wanted to talk to about whatever I wanted to talk about. And we would get on and it'd be like 45 minutes later and we're still yammering along. And I loved it, like being able to kind of follow the conversation wherever the conversation needed to go. But then I started noticing some things. So I use Buzzsprout to host my podcast,
Mhm.
and they have stats. And you can kind of look at the stats and see what's going on and which episodes are getting the most traction. And I
Yeah.
noticed two things. One is I noticed that the episodes that were 30 minutes or under did better than the like 1 hour, 15-minute, 45-minute
Oh,
ones, which
interesting.
makes sense. I think everybody's kind of pressed for time. So I did notice that the shorter ones did better. And the other thing I noticed is the titles. So when I first started, I would do kind of lyrical titles. This is the poet in me, right? So, I would do something like, let me see some of the earlier episode, but it's like, all trains arrive on writing success with Kate Hartfield. So the problem with that is it doesn't tell you anything about what we're going to be talking about. And so
Mhm.
I found that the more that I started saying how to do something, those were the ones that got the most traction. So I had one, how to find the focus to write. It's from early on, and that has just blown everything else out of the water. How to outline your book, how to manage creative anxiety, how to, so now I'm trying to take the episodes, listen to them, or read the transcript rather, and then pull out a how-to for the title and keep them under 30 minutes in order to just foster people being, more eager to listen to them.
That's excellent. That's such great advice. And I think one of the things for us as editors, and some of us do a lot of author coaching, whether it be author coaching on platform or author coaching on a book proposal or a query letter, is being able to give writers resources that we know are going to work, that they're practical. One of the questions that I usually ask authors that I start to work with is, how do you learn better? Like, what's your learning method? Do you prefer like a video? Are you a reader, like a book reader? Do you prefer a podcast? So it's just good to have all these tools in our, kit so that we can share and offer other without us having to produce always the content. And I think that's kind of one of the secrets of building this community, is to be able to share each other's work. And that's going to help another writer besides us learning, but the content is already there. Let's just go ahead and share it. So
Yeah,
I like that
absolutely.
about your podcast. It's just easy to share. It's a link. They know they can sign up to your newsletter.
Mhm.
And and then tell us a little bit about so you said you were marinating on this idea of starting the podcast and you had thought about it for a while. So now that you have this experience of over a year doing it, what are three things that you think editors should thinking about maybe starting a podcast, if they're on the fence, they could do, and why would you recommend doing a podcast format maybe for an editor?
So I love it for building an audience and feeling connected. So I think there's something about listening to someone's voice, when I'm talking to people feel like they know me. And so the building of community is significant. I often will get emails, I'll send out an email saying, this is this week's podcast. And I always get emails saying, oh my God, I really needed that right now, or that was so helpful, and so there's just a sense of, and I always reply to those, and there's just a sense of being in community and people getting to know me. And so I think it brings you closer to your audience. So if you're looking to build up a business, I think that's really valuable. I think, I don't do a lot of this, but I know other podcasters who do a better job of it, of using your podcast to also build your email list. So you can pretty easily in most podcast platforms put in basically a little ad that says, so for example, I just did next week, my podcast is going to talk about do-it-yourself writing retreats. And I have a freebie on that. So I easily could put in a 30-second blurb that just says, wondering about, how to organize your own writing retreats, go here, get this. And folks do a better job of that than I do. And And it does help increase your email list. So I think that's definitely the
I was
benefit.
going to ask you about that. Is it because it's like the chicken and the egg kind of thing? Like, do I start with a podcast to build my list? Do I start with a list to build my podcast? Or do they just start somewhere and it will build kind of thing as well? So it feels
Yeah,
like,
I don't think it necessarily matters where you start. I had an email list by the time I started my podcast. So it was, there was like this community of people that I was creating content for, and I knew them pretty well. I'd done like lots of surveys and interviews, and I knew what they were interested in. And so that also helped me guide, especially I think the first season of the content. So, but I don't think it matters, which you start. You can certainly build an email list via podcasting as well, but you've got to have that set up. You've got to have a freebie or a lead magnet, and a short URL where memorable that you can send people to, where they can sign up for it, and then you can use it to build an email list. Absolutely.
right. Good. Thank you for that. And would you be able to share a little bit about what your production process is like? You
Sure.
talked a little bit about it already, but if you had to go like in order, this is what I do first, this is what I do next, this is what I do last.
Right. So this was the part that had me panicked and not starting a podcast for a long time, because I was really worried that that I wouldn't be able to figure it out, that something would go wrong, that whatever. I had all the worries. And what I found is that, so originally I started out with something called Riverside. Riverside.fm is an online podcasting studio. And what I found was that it didn't work for writers. So you had to have you had to use Google Chrome as your web browser in order to use it effectively. So, and I was routinely sending, and they get a link and they log into a room, and there were things that they had to do on their side. And writers, for the most part, especially the ones I was talking to, were not at all techie. And so I was often having to like coach and troubleshoot and the tech side. And so I stopped using it. It did a nice job, but it wasn't for my audience. So now it's just Zoom. So the setup is different. Maybe we can talk about when you first set up your podcast, the things you need to have in place. But right now, my process is, I invite someone to be on the show and I send them a link from Calendly. They sign up at a time that works for them. That's open on my calendar. And then that goes into their calendar, and they also get a Zoom link. And that's the link at which they show up and do the show. And we get on Zoom. When I get them, when they show up the day of for the recording, I talk about what we're going to talk about, right? So we're going to have a conversation about this, right? And I let them know that I'm trying to hit the sweet spot of 25 to 30 minutes, and that I'll be looking for kind of how-to-ish kind of things, and tips and techniques and practical tips. And then I hit record, and it's just a conversation at that point. So I hit record on Zoom. Zoom processes it, and then it gets downloaded. We use Google Docs. So I've got a Google folder for the podcast, and each interview in there has its own folder. And so I also I asked them to email me a headshot that goes in there. The MP4, so Zoom gives you something that is an MP4A. It's the audio of a video. I put that in the Google Drive. And then what happens is I have a VA who helps me now. I didn't always, but I do now. So she will take that M4A file, and she will, if you Google convert M4A to MP3, there's a little converter, and you can just convert it. It's super simple. She converts it. And then when I first set up the show, I did an intro and an outro. And so she takes the intro and edits. Yeah, she just drops it on the front. She uses, I forget what she's using. It might be something called Filmora, but I'm pretty sure it's video software she's using to edit it, even though it's audio. And so she puts the intro, goes through. If I tell her, oh, there was a bit of a mess here, I need you to fix this, she'll do. But otherwise, it's like, add the intro, here's the convo, add the outro, And then I use something in Buzzsprout called Magic Mastering, which just evens out all the levels, the sound levels. I
Okay.
can't believe I know that. That's anyway, there you go. This is me not technically doing a podcast. It evens it all out. I pay a little extra for that, I think $6 a month. And there we go. And then all I have to do is go into Canva and make, so when you came on, Linda, you sent me a headshot and I took your headshot and I put it in Canva and made a little graphic. The graphic goes on social. Buzzsprout will let me create a sound bite that's like sound waves over a
nice.
graphic that you
Yeah.
often see on social. And so my VA will do that now. I used to do it. And then what I do is I take the transcript. So once I have the video, or not the video, the audio, right? I have it's all been edited, intro, outro, it's all there together. I take that and I give it to riverside.fm/transcription, which gives me a free transcription. So now I have a text file. I give the text file to ChatGPT and I say, please write a 500-word summary of this podcast transcript using a warm and friendly tone. And it does that. And then I pop that into a Google Doc and I edit that. I don't love ChatGPT. I find it a little generic in what
Impersonal. Yeah.
Impersonal and generic. So I need to, even telling it to use a warm and friendly tone, I still need to put it in my voice. So there's a good half hour of editing that goes into, but at least I didn't have to take, an 8-page transcript and turn it into 500 words. So that has saved me some time.
Yeah.
And then I pop that in a Google Doc and I use it to write an email to my list. Right now, my Buzzsprout allows you to send people directly to that immediate audio file. So I do that. I encourage people to subscribe, but not everybody does. One of the challenges I had at the start was that my email list is a little older, meaning the people are a little older, and they weren't like all down with the podcast like the kids, So I give people several options. I give them, if you want to listen to it in your podcast app, it's already there. If you want to listen to it on your desktop, click this link and that takes them straight to the Buzzsprout.
Great.
And if you'd like to read the transcript, you can go here on my website and I put that up on the website. And I do that also to kind of get a little bit of SEO boost on the site. And also to feature the person with links out to whatever it is they're promoting. Maybe it's just their website, maybe they had a freebie. And then I email my list with that.
Perfect.
So that's the whole thing.
Every podcast that gets recorded gets its own email sent to your email list. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And the two things that I'm picking up from what you're saying are, one is how to generate the content as efficiently as possible, because of course this is not a book, it's not a novella, you just need a blurb that you can use to promote it, and that can be repurposed then again in your email list, so we're not writing again and writing again and writing again. And the other thing that I think is, and we do that a lot here at the networking studio, and I don't know how much it's noticed sometimes or not, but it's accessibility. We work with audiences of different ages, of different visual capabilities, of different time zones, and so how can we make the content available to everyone 24/7 in whatever way they're able to access it? And so having transcripts is, not a lot of people realize that, but it's fundamental to be able to have, and like you said, then that transcript helps with SEO as well.
Yeah. And then the email that I write, my VA uses the text in the email to write social captions. So I never see, I'll go into Facebook and I'll see that she's put up a post of the soundbite from Buzzsprout and a caption. And I wrote that caption, but I didn't see it before it went out because she pulled the text from the email. So it's repurposing as much as possible.
That's awesome. That is so good. And what do we do about guests? Because not every guest that signs up might be the type of guest we want to have on our show. With that, even though, you can vet someone as much as possible beforehand, but every once in a while somebody comes along that they're just not the best guest, or something happens that you feel might compromise your work or what you're doing. So when that happens, what's the best way out of that you're finding? Or how do you work when those kind of difficult situations come up?
I haven't had a lot of those. There's been a couple of interviews where I felt like, so I interview for our local, we have the Ottawa International Writers Festival, and I do like in-person panel interviews of writers. And so I'm really at ease interviewing people and encouraging a conversation. But it does rely on the other person also being at ease in a conversation. And I've had a couple where it's sort of felt like pulling teeth. And I think my response there is to, try as much as possible to get in their shoes and become just very enthusiastic about them and what they're doing, and try to find, and those sometimes are shorter episodes if I'm really, trying hard to like find the stuff. But I haven't had many of those. The only challenge I've had is, I wanted to be sure that my interviewees were diverse. And what I find is that when I go public and ask, so I've gone on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, which is filled with writers, so many writers of just, rich, diverse backgrounds. And I go out and I say, I'm looking for some podcast guests. It is the straight white man who shows up and signs up. It's like, no, but and it's happened every time I've done it, even when I say, I really would prefer, like, I'm open to anyone, but I really would prefer XYZ, straight white guy in, like, clicking the link. And that's been a bit challenging. So I have done some interviews that I probably, frankly, wouldn't have done otherwise. And then the other thing that's sometimes difficult is when things happen in the world. So after October 7th, I had a Jewish writer on, and, you can't not talk about it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily, like, I wasn't like pro-Israel in that circumstance. And so it's just trying to figure out how can we have a good conversation about this, which is part you as the interviewer and part the writer. Most writers are really used to talking about their work. And if they've done any kind of interviewing before, they've been asked all the random things, right?
Yeah.
So it's usually not too bad. It hasn't been too bad. I wouldn't schedule someone if I wasn't going to go through with it. I would rather just cancel it and just not hit record. Then.
So, on the other side of that, Brittany and I got invited recently, about a month and a half ago, to be on someone's podcast and to talk about the book, because we were going to be presenting at a conference. And I said, absolutely, yes. And I usually do those interviews. And I got the invitation, scheduled it, everything. And so the day of the interview, I decided to go and do my research and read a little bit. And I should have done this, mind you, probably several days. This is how I learned my lesson. And I listened to some of the podcasts and I was not impressed at all. They were very wordy, and the interviewer was just not very appropriate with her language. And then I saw a couple of YouTube videos, and I was just a little bit shocked at some of the way she had an editor on, and she just blatantly told the editor, she's like, okay, can you tell me again your name? I can't remember what you do. What is it that you do? And it was like, wait a minute, like you invited this person. And then, first of all, why are you even publishing this? Edit it so that you're starting off with this is, or, so just the demeanor of the person was so lax, so messy, so sloppy that I kind of got into a panic that day. And I emailed Brittany and a little support group of editors. I'm like, what do I do? Because I'm starting to get this really ugly gut feeling that I shouldn't do this. And I trusted my gut feeling, and I just emailed them. I said, I'm so sorry, something's come up. I need to reschedule. But I felt like this could really compromise what we're trying to do, that we've been on this show. So I think also having the courage to say no. I don't know, is every good is every publicity good publicity? I don't know. In that case, it just didn't feel like it, but it does happen though. So I'm assuming it happens, and a lot of us just don't get to see those episodes, thankfully, or they shouldn't probably be published publicly. But yeah, that was the first time of a lot of things that we've done that where I was like, this is not, no, we need to walk away from this now.
Yeah. I think I would, if I had that situation, I just wouldn't hit publish on that. Like if I found myself in a conversation where it just really felt against my values, then I just wouldn't hit publish on it, and I just have to apologize.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like it might. I'm in my early 50s.
Mhm.
All my give a fucks have left the barn. Like there's a certain amount of like I don't care anymore. Still some, obviously, but I would just not publish on that.
Yeah.
I found
Yeah.
myself in a really awkward
Yeah,
spot.
I was surprised and I really despise myself for not having done my homework sooner. And I thought this is
Mm,
all on me. This is all on
yeah.
me because
And
I
it
knew
happens, you know,
it
it
happens.
happens because we
So
do think that any visibility is good visibility.
yeah. So now I know. So Rhonda, my last question for you, and I'm sure that maybe Melissa and Jamie have questions too, but if when you see the podcasts out there that you're listening to or newer podcasts that are coming on, what do you think are like three maybe mistakes that some podcasters make on their show or with their guests or things that
Mm.
don't work?
Um, I mean, I think to some extent, I would say the first one is like really overthinking it and over preparing to the point where you sometimes hear interviews where people obviously have a set list of questions they've prepared based on what they know about the person. And they're interested in asking all their questions instead of starting a conversation and having a conversation that's responsive,
Mhm.
and I think that's way more interesting to listen to than ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, get an answer. So I think there's a certain amount of like overthinking, over prepared that you can be. Or maybe it's just a kind of style of interviewing that's more rigid. That's the first thing. The second thing is, like everything else, it's not a build it, and they will come kind of situation. So you do have to be prepared to promote it. We promote, we promote the weekly podcast a couple of times that week on social, but then 3 months from now, we'll put it out again. So because, there will be lots of folks on social who never saw it the first time. The other thing that I've done is between seasons, and I'm about to do it again now after next week's session airs, I run traffic ads on Facebook to the podcast while I'm on a break. And then when I come back, my next episode automatically gets more downloads because people have subscribed via the ads. It's not expensive. It's like, maybe I run like $10 a day. Has
Right.
been traffic ads. And so I do all of that to promote it. And also, of course, sending it out to my email list. I like to support the writers that come on the show, the editors that come on the show and put like links out to their things. So I do that because I think that, it's important to me to be building up community. And so I'm happy to offer that. But I definitely have, engaged with other podcast hosts who expect me to promote the show and they don't do a lot themselves to promote the show. Like I've been interviewed on their show and they expect me to promote it, but then they don't do
They don't
anything.
promote it.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're not really doing that much. And then they're wondering why they're not getting the downloads,
Yeah.
So it's not a, if you build it, they will come. And then I think just, we don't have to overcomplicate it. Like you really can just get on Zoom, hit record,
Yeah.
and get a conversation up. Some podcasts don't even do the intro outro. They read it like every time they kind of say, oh, this is the show and this is what we're here for. So I think you really can simplify the production quite a bit. And as long as the conversation is a quality conversation, people will be happy with it. And then the other thing is just making sure that your audio is okay. It doesn't have to be like professional level, true crime podcast,
Yeah. Sound
level
board.
audio. It can be just basic good audio. And so making sure that there's no noise in the background when you're interviewing someone, as I say, using those mastering things that your podcast host will offer. And then you're fine, so we don't have to overcomplicate it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that everything you're saying makes sense. And I think that's the biggest fear when Brittany and I we have a whole spreadsheet of the podcast that we've been wanting to start for 2 years that we just cannot bring ourselves to do. And it's because of that, because we're overcomplicating, we're over planning, we're overthinking it instead of maybe just going for it. So I'm gonna have to talk to Brittany about that after this. I think one of the things that I really like is that the podcast seems to really reach all of these writers around the world that you wouldn't have access to in your immediate, context, or maybe in your local writers group. So you are able to reach a lot more people. And therefore, I'm assuming, and I want to talk a little bit about your courses or the retreats that you do and the boot camps, because you're able, again, there's the podcast, it helps build your email list, it helps give you visibility and exposure. But then that also, part of that must translate, I hope, into people that decide to take some of your courses or boot camps. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I mean, that's really hard to track, if I'm honest. I could track it by setting up a link that I only ever share on the podcast, and I haven't done that. I did share a boot camp, and I got a few people in the boot camp who said they'd heard about it on the podcast. But I don't even know that all the people listening to the podcast are on my email list. Like I'm assuming there's some overlap, because I'm sending people from the email list to listen, but there will also be people that, where the algorithm is just suggesting it after they listen to another podcast, and they're not necessarily on my list. So, there are things I could do to be better at that for sure. But I have seen some, and I know that my current students do listen to the podcast. Because
When you say students, though, who are you referring to for those that don't
Oh,
know?
sorry, these would be folks in my First Book Finish program, which is a year-long book coaching program. And so, yeah, so I just don't do it. Honestly, I don't do a good enough job of that. I need to do a better job of like having a URL that's only for the podcast, and promoting that, and even advertising something within the podcast itself. That I now can do, because I've just redone my website, and it broke all the links and la la la. So I can start doing some of that. But that's really the only way, because otherwise in Buzzsprout, when they give you the stats, like they tell me, they forecast how many they think the next episode will be. They tell me how many my last episode got, how many I got in the last month, how many I got in the last 90 days, and how many I got all told. But they don't say, and I can tell, the different levels for each episode. But then I've got to do the analytical kind of thinking about what that means. They don't really do that. So, and there's no way that I have right now to track that. So it's the kind of thing where I'd have to do the work, and I haven't done that yet.
But at least they give you the stats, so that's interesting. So I think what I like about that is, maybe if we were to take something like that on during a quiet time or a break, maybe it would be a time that we could sit down and probably process all that information, or have someone who understands all of that and process it maybe for us. And I have one last question, and Jamie, please, feel free to pop in at any time. But getting book reviews is like every author's constant quest. But what about getting podcast reviews? Because one of the things that I find so difficult is to find the review button for a podcast. I'm on Apple Podcasts, but it is just so hidden under so many layers of places, that it's just a really huge deterrent not to leave a review. So is that something that you experience as well when you're trying to
I did, and I've done a couple of things. One is my outro says, if you enjoyed this, please leave a review. And I'll promise to, read them all, and I have read them. But I just assume that most people aren't going to be able to find that. You can do things like run a little giveaway, for everyone, because it does help the algorithm, if you get good reviews, to push it out to other people. So reviews are important, and it's not something I've focused a lot on. I did, as I say, I put it in the outro. And for a while I was, reminding my email list to hit me up with a review and so on. And several of them did, right? So I did get some reviews, but I've heard podcasters in their outro say, go leave a 5-star review. That's a little bold. Like, I'm not going to tell anybody to do that. But I think having it in the outro helps, because you can tell people you know, you're listening on this app, it'll just take a couple of minutes, but the button is hard to find,
It's
especially.
hard to find. I'm thinking like, is that something like a link? And I don't even know you can get a link to that button that you could put in the show notes. But I just always remember wanting to support fellow podcasters
Yeah,
and just not being able to leave a review or not taking 10
yeah,
minutes to find that button. And it's just, I'm a
yeah,
reviewer. I leave reviews for everything, but still sometimes it's just really hard to find. And it's so
yeah,
just,
absolutely, absolutely. I've also heard podcasters do, you know, where they start off the show by reading out a review.
oh, I love that idea.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're promoting the fact that you can leave a review, and you know, you can get a little bit of visibility on the show by leaving a review.
Joanna Penn does that, I think, really well. If I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken, she tends to mention a lot of the people that leave reviews. So
Which is
that's,
great. Yeah.
yeah. Jamie, do you have any questions or is there anything else that we should be talking about before we wrap up?
Oh, I think that you answered all the questions. I guess maybe one thing I really don't like in recordings is hearing people's breath. Is that something that the mastering, the $6 a month takes care of, or would you have to manually edit that?
You would. So that comes from using a highly sensitive microphone. And so, you know, right now when I interview, I'm just like this, no headphones, no microphone. And then I have Zoom set up, the audio settings set up to take care of any background noise. And then I have the magic mastering. So that gets me most of the way there. You know, it doesn't mean that like if a car went by and beeped, that you wouldn't necessarily hear it. But it does mean that I don't get I was interviewing someone the other day for a summit I'm doing, and she had a scarf and a sweater on, and something was off in her mic, and it just kept going like it was And I know people are going to complain about it. I know they're going to complain about it because especially if you wear headphones, you just, you know, it's a little shouty. So yeah, so that's how I've taken care of it, is by not using a microphone that's like right here, you know.
That makes sense.
Jamie, would you care to share with Rhonda a little bit about what you do? Because Jamie's an accomplished author as well, and I think we should talk about that and then also mention the type of editing that you do.
Oh, sure. I mostly am just doing book fiction right now. Actually, I'm doing a lot of memoirs. A friend of mine, we've got a author services um, company, and so we've got some big clients that we like help them from start to finish. We do all the rounds of editing and stuff like that. But then we're also doing a class, how to write your memoir. It's like a 6-week thing. We do Q&A and stuff like that. That one is, we just do a 30-page sample edit on it. So I've been staying nice and busy with that, which is good. But I definitely see how the podcast could, you know, bring different people in, and it's a good idea. I don't know if I could I don't know if I could have the time for it, but I know that you're Rhonda, it looks like you're extremely busy and you've still got time for it. So
Yeah, it takes me about an hour a week now
wow.
to get a podcast out, but it used to take a lot longer. So it's really having a VA help me has changed
Yeah.
my whole life.
Yeah.
So
The
highly
mindset
recommend.
of being able as a freelancer, I think we forget that it's okay to hire someone who can help us sometimes.
Yeah.
There's such our own roadblock that we, kind of gatekeep ourselves, I think, with that, where we need to remember that here's someone who can help us with things that we don't always have to be involved in everything. So that
Jamie,
doesn't.
you write your own books as well?
I did, yeah. I've got 3 YA historical fiction books.
Oh, fun.
Last
Okay.
one was, I think it was like 2 years ago that I
You
published
should
it.
come on the podcast. I'd love to talk to you. That'd be fun.
I
Yeah.
haven't, it's weird to to like try to market so far after the release, you know?
There's no timeline on that. You know, if you traditional publisher will give up after 6 months, but we don't have to. So I just put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome.
Yes, Jamie, you absolutely must.
I must, and I'll stroke my whiskers while you do.
Mhm.
No, and what I like about Jamie is that when you look at her covers, you know what you're reading. It's consistent. There's a feel, there's a theme. You know exactly what to expect, and that is so good, I think, when you're an avid reader. So I'm glad that we have Jamie in our group. Rhonda, thank you so much. I know the fact that you fit us into your
Welcome.
schedule on a random, day when you have so many other things that you could be doing. We really appreciate it. We'll be sharing you know, the recording with our members. We'll put it on, we have a undisclosed YouTube channel, if you will, or on, what's it called? Not public, but
Unpublished.
yeah. But I'll send you the link as well in case you can repurpose this for anything as well. And I'll send you the transcript. And here's to more opportunities for all of us. So thank you so much for being here and have a great rest of the week, everyone.
My pleasure. Take care,
Thank
Linda.
you.
Bye, Jamie.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.